Last month, Steve Pagliuca, who made millions turning companies around at Bain Capital, took over as chairman of Boston 2024, as that organization looked for a turnaround of its own. Today, for the first time since getting involved in the Olympics effort, Pagliuca spoke in public about Boston 2024 at an event hosted by Bostino. He addressed Olympic critics and those who say the concept of a walkable games is no longer feasible now that some events are going to be held in New Bedford and Billerica.
I think there's some confusion about that. We've always said that we still will have one of the most compact games in the history of the Olympics. Boston is set up to have a compact game. The number of games is 32, 33 venues. Mid-high 20s will be right in the Boston area. You know, I think that the opposition is actually healthy. And the unfortunate part is that I don't think they know what they're opposed to yet.
Joining us now to talk more about the evolving Olympic bid is Lauren Dusensky, who's covered Boston 2024 for the Dorchester Reporter, and Boston City Councilor Josh Zakim, who's proposed putting the Olympic bid to a citywide vote. Lauren, Josh, thanks for being here. So what did you make of what Pagliuca had to say today? How'd those comments strike you?
No surprises.
Yeah?
Honestly, I mean, it was pretty straightforward, other than that last part where he mentions that he doesn't think that opponents know what they're opposing.
Well, I was wondering about that because I feel like watching this, there's this tendency, it's almost like people who support the Olympics can't help on occasion impugning either the motives or the qualifications of the people who are skeptical of the games.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting comment that you just showed there, and I think from my interactions and from their appearance at City Council hearings, the opponents of the Olympics have a pretty thoughtful and reasoned response. That doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to agree with them, but I think they've thought about it, and I think their concerns relating to finances and where we're turning our attention is very valid.
You could also say that if the skeptics are in any way not fully informed, it's because the full details of the bid have not been released and people have had to fight to get them by FOIAing and other things. In the 3 or so weeks since Steve Pagliuca took over as chair of Boston 2024 and Larry Lucchino and Jack Connors joined as strategic advisors, have you two, you know, from your media vantage point and from your government vantage point, have you noticed any either substantive or stylistic change in the way Boston 2024 is doing business?
I mean, if you look at, you know, the new venues that are being rolled out in this bid 2.0 conversation, there's a real emphasis on wait and see. You know, end of the month, that's when we're going to see some substantive changes. I think there's still a lot more, you know, burden of proof here. You know, we still need to see more. It's hard to say with 3 weeks, and, you know, poll numbers aren't necessarily forgiving, at least in that regard, but
what do you think?
Well, I think we're going to have some new city council hearings. That'll be the first ones under this new leadership, and I look forward to engaging with them. I personally haven't seen big changes, at least in the public statements yet, but again, looking forward to seeing that Plan 2.0 and making sure it's going to take into account the concerns about public resources, about neighborhood input on all of the venues.
One change I think worth noting is that today Pagliuca said that under the current plan, Bid 2.0, that there will actually be a surplus to the Olympic proposal, which would provide a cushion in case of any cost overruns. So that strikes me as a big deal.
That's great. I think if that can be shown to happen, I mean, my number one concern, the concern I hear from voters across the city, is we don't want to be on the hook for cost overruns. We don't want to be spending, you know, gobs of public money on this. So I think that's the number one issue there. And I think as, you know, member of the City Council and our role as a fiscal watchdog for the city, that is the number one concern.
So, Lauren, you had a big story in the Dorchester Reporter this week talking about a new development model or a potential new development model for the bid. Can you explain what it is and how it would work?
Absolutely. So this isn't set in stone. This is just one option that's being floated, but it's being floated throughout the city. Basically, it's called the Master Developer Plan, in which a master developer who is established in the city of Boston, knows the ins and outs of the process of acquiring and developing land, would come in, buy up the parcels, specifically at Wyandotte Circle and Midtown, at cost, and develop it to Olympic specifications, and either bear the financial burden or windfall for those parcels, unlike the previous bid, which said that the city and state would do that.
Josh, what do you think as a Boston City Councilor? Does that sound like an intriguing possibility to you?
I think anything that's going to take the burden off of taxpayers, whether at the city or state level, is a step in the right direction. However, I think concerns about development, neighborhood impact, and displacement are going to be there regardless of who the developer is, and those need to be addressed adequately.
What's the status of those 4 non-binding votes that you were trying to get on the ballot for this fall? The last time I interviewed you here, we had a different set, and you wanted voters in Boston to get to weigh in on 4 different things, right? Let me see if my list is correct. Should Boston host the game? Should public money be used? Should the city make financial guarantees to cover overruns? And should the city use eminent domain? What's the status of your proposal to have votes on these?
Well, I think, since February when we introduced them, there's been a big change in that sort of across the board, people are embracing the idea of a referendum. This specific proposal is still in the City Council's special committee on the Olympics. I've been told that we'll be scheduling a hearing. The committee chairman, Councilor Linehan, will be scheduling a hearing this summer, and that would be the next step in working to get them on the ballot. I want to make sure to see, where my colleagues are, where the public is, and where advocates on all sides think we should go.
Do you still like the idea of having those 4 non-binding votes, even though a statewide referendum looks likely?
I think the statewide referendum isn't guaranteed, so that's sort of one of the questions I want to ask when we get to that hearing, to make sure that, it doesn't matter to me who writes, if I write the referendum or someone else does. It matters that the questions that are asked are out there for the voters, that people get a chance to meaningfully weigh in a way that's going to sort of guide us moving forward.
All right, one final question for both of you. The fact that the games have ceased to be this sort of Boston-centric concept and are now becoming, I believe Steve Paliuka's word was, compact, among people that you speak with, does that strengthen the case for the games, or does it dilute the case for the games?
Look at poll numbers. There's absolutely support for that. And I think, among my people that I've spoken with and people that I work with, I think that there absolutely is an appetite for that.
And you're talking about people in Boston, right, since you report for the Reporter. All right, how about you, Josh?
I think Lauren makes a good point that clearly the poll numbers show sort of broader support for that. But again, for me as an elected official, the question comes down to how are people near the venues going to be treated, how are their concerns going to be addressed, and where's the money coming from? And I think, and I hope that the new version of the bid is going to address those concerns, and we can move forward.
All right, we shall see very soon, I guess. Josh Zakim, thanks for being here. Lauren, thank you as well. Lauren
Thank you.
Dezenski from the Dorchester Reporter.